poppin' Auburn fan base out there? Back with another afternoon car video. It's about 5:55, and man, it is 90 degrees outside. Hot and steamy as the projections of this particular football season is always a matter of concern because we just really don't know at this point. There's some casual optimism that the season will take place, but we just don't know. And as always, it's great to be an Auburn Tiger, War Eagle. Go ahead and subscribe to Vernon Speaks Sports Auburn as we upload a video concerning the Auburn Tigers just about every day on average. Definitely appreciate the support and really have fun doing this because it's something that I would have been doing anyway, talking to somebody about Auburn. But since I moved out of the state and, you don't run into Auburn fans as much because it was pretty easy when I was living in Alabama. That's all. I mean, you run into people all day and you kind of take it for granted being able to talk about Auburn on a daily basis because if you are an Auburn fan or if you are an Auburn graduate, you talk about the football team very, very often. Probably not as ridiculously as I do, but you talk about them pretty often. So going into this 2020 football season, man, the defense for the Tigers, you're talking about from an interior standpoint, I think these guys are about as solid as any other team in the country. Now, of course, Auburn's got to replace Derrick Brown and Marlon Davidson, but with some of the interior linemen coming up, I think Auburn might be in pretty good shape. You talk about DeCorn Newkirk and Coinus Miller. Big Cat Bryant returns, and we want to see if T.D. Moultrie will finally emerge as a force. Because if you look at his high school film, I mean, T.D. Moultrie was pretty doggone good. As a matter of fact, he was very elite. He was pretty fast. I mean, he looked like he was somebody that could actually play linebacker for Auburn, but he just really hasn't, really developed to an elite standpoint as he did. He kind of reminds me of Michael Harris, the linebacker that Auburn had, looked great on high school film, but it just didn't transfer over for him for Power 5 football, which is pretty unfortunate. Michael Harris winds up hitting the transfer portal, headed out to another school. But Rodney Garner, Travis Williams, co-defensive coordinator, Kevin Steele, these guys are doing an excellent job, especially even on the recruiting trail. Really doing a good job of replenishing that linebacker and defensive line, that interior portion of the defensive line and linebacker core. And the thing, once Auburn gets to the point, that's why this JaQuincy McKinstry recruit is so important to the Tigers, because to add, that's why these defenses like Alabama and LSU and now Georgia are becoming so elite, because in addition to teams having difficulty moving the football as far as running, these guys are pretty good in coverage as well. Because if you look back at Georgia's defense on last year, that just goes to show you. Now, they were a lot of blue-collar guys. It wasn't just one specific star that stood out on Georgia's defense, unlike, say, Roquan Smith and some of those guys from back in the day. But the team from last year was very solid across the board. They were very talented, and they did their jobs. They didn't allow a lot of points. I think they averaged giving up about 10 points per game. It was very difficult to move the football on Georgia. As a matter of fact, Auburn, late in the season, it finally got a rushing touchdown against Georgia. And people can say, well, the SEC East is weak and blah, 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 blah. No, if you're a defense that in any Power 5 conference that only allows less than 15 points per game, and it's absolutely difficult for you to run on them, you have a chance to make it to the college football playoff. As a matter of fact, Georgia, in a very erroneous game against South Carolina, was that particular game away from being representative possibly in the college football playoff, assuming that they would have had a better showing against LSU. I was actually kind of shocked at how bad LSU beat Georgia this past year. So when we talk about that, we talk about Auburn's defense and how they're continuing from a roster standpoint to build the depth, to build the talent on this particular defense. The cornerback position is the one at the forefront. Auburn has to continue to target these high-end 4-stars. And if you can get a 5-star at cornerback, I mean, like a Derek Stingley, my God, this guy out of LSU is just phenomenal. But Auburn just has not been able to land guys like that. It has to stop being a situation where you're having to rely upon position changes in order to fill your staff. That's not being loaded. I think I remember hearing a subscriber talk about Auburn being loaded this year. Now, I'm not saying Auburn is not going to be a good football team with a pretty decent opportunity. But I think when you start talking about a team being loaded, what you really want to see is that too deep in all the critical positions. And that's just something that Auburn is not quite there yet. They're starting to get there even on offense. If Auburn can get some solid offensive line play, and if the skill position players actually live up to their billing, like say if DJ Williams, Tank Bigsby, Kobe Hudson, all those guys, if they actually live up to the possible capability, you might be. Auburn is loaded in spots, and that's something that Auburn has to. That's what recruiting will do for you. And when we talk about, let's kind of switch gears here a little bit. We talk about recruiting, which is so important, and we talk about Gus Malzahn. There was a comment that was left, I think it was on yesterday, that I was very intrigued by, and it kind of spoke to my heart, honestly, when you talk about Gus Malzahn. And it was Colonel Roberts Jr., who actually has made some comments before that I've always been intrigued by. And basically what it says is Gus's main problem is he doesn't have a solid blueprint to follow when it comes to recruiting. He knows by now that he won't get the top 5 stars at every position. Throwing food to the wall to see what sticks isn't good enough in the SEC anymore. So he has to hit these JUCO spots. Yep, he absolutely does. So he can develop young talent with no rush and weed out pretenders. If they think their current formula is valid, then Malik Willis. See, when we start talking about the Malik Willises and the Woody Barretts and Joey Gatewoods and all those, they just weren't good fits. I think Joey Gatewood could have been good, and I really like Malik Willis. But see, when you think about Auburn football as well, to piggyback on this particular comment, Auburn was right in the middle. See, a lot of people forget about this. Auburn was in the middle of coordinators, in the middle of position coaches. So Auburn's tenure as far as staffing from a coaching standpoint hasn't been as solid as people would like to think, especially on the offensive side of the football field. Because I think after 2013, there was a very unique struggle, I think, on Gus Malzahn's part to figure out what the identity of the Auburn Tigers offense was going to look like. The success of Nick Marshall kind of made it to where he wanted to continue to hurry up, no huddle offense. Then he was torn between, whether he would allow an offensive coordinator to actually take on the reins of coaching, hands off, and then the debacle with Chip Lindsey. So that's where you get those inconsistent years of recruiting. I think this year and last year are probably two of the best. And I think Gus Malzahn, to Colonel Roberts' comment, Gus Malzahn and his staff are finally understanding what they can and cannot do from a recruiting standpoint. Of course, the 5 stars, for the most part, are going to go to the Clemsons, maybe Oklahoma, maybe LSU, maybe Oregon. Auburn can start winning some key football games, and probably get into the SEC championship and actually be able to be more attractive to some of these other schools. But until then, they're going to have to be more creative, like what they did is going to Kansas City to find guys, going to Texas to find guys, these diamond in the roughs, these guys that can be developed. Because when you really start looking at the high-end 4-star recruit around that 93, 94 range, those guys can, with the proper level of development, can develop into really competitive football players, as we've seen in 2019 with the defense and how they emerged. And you think about Jeremiah Denson and Jeremiah Denson last year. You know, he came into Auburn as a two-star recruit. Daniel Thomas came to Auburn as a two-star recruit as well, I think, and they developed into pretty good football players. And I think Gus Malzahn and his staff are really starting to see how they can strategize to build a solid class. And at 21 right now, you bring on, say for example, you bring on JaQuincy McKinstry. Not only do you have quality, not quantity, but you have a quality class, because you know you bring him on. You talking that one recruit boosting your class all the way into probably say 11 or 12, because of his rating will allow your overall rating to go up. All right, guys, let me know what you think about this video. Recruiting Gus Malzahn, Auburn getting ready for this 10-game SEC slate. Like the video, comment, and subscribe to Vernon Speaks Sports Auburn. And as always, it's great to be an Auburn Tiger, War Eagle.